Film music, a genre that has only existed for about 100 years, has undergone perhaps more rapid changes than any other type of music while still remaining the same genre. From the silent film pianists to the electronic synthesizer soundtracks of today, the sounds of film remain the backbone of the motion picture. But how did we get from the silent film music to what we have today? In the midst of a time when pop and pre-existing music threatened to eliminate the genre, 3 different film composers revived audiences' interest in film music and have helped define what we now consider to be the modern film soundtrack. Perhaps the most famous modern film composer is John Williams. John Williams came from a musical family and he had extensive classical training, learning to play the trumpet, trombone, bassoon, cello, and clarinet. He also studied piano with the film composer Robert Van Epps, and he began his career in music as a studio pianist, quickly becoming active in Hollywood and performing for soundtracks such as To Kill a Mockingbird, West Side Story, and the Peter Gunn Show intro. He slowly worked his way up, going from orchestrator, arranger, and conductor until he finally began writing his own film scores. He began composing for television shows in the 60s, but in 1971, John Williams won his first Academy Award for his orchestration of Fiddler on the Roof, and from that moment on, his career as a film composer took off. In 1975, he wrote one of the most recognizable film scores of all time, the score for Steven Spielberg's Jaws. In fact, because of his score for this movie, Spielberg has chosen John Williams as his composer for over 30 of his films. It was then Spielberg who recommended Williams to the director George Lucas, when Lucas came looking for a classical film composer for Star Wars. Lucas was looking for an old-fashioned composer that could write a score in a style like the film composer Korngold. While writing the script, Lucas listened to classical composers like Wagner, Strauss, Dvorak, and Holst, and he even considered using classical music instead of a score like the 1968 film 2001: A Space Odyssey. George Lucas specifically wanted the movie to feel emotionally familiar, and John Williams was able to create that through a score that showed the influences of Wagner, Holst, and Korngold. At the time, however, the sci-fi genre and the classical film score were considered unfashionable. In fact, 20th Century Fox didn't even plan on selling a music album for the film, expecting the movie to completely flop. However, within 2 months, the double LP featuring 74 minutes of straight symphonic music had sold 650,000 copies, and it would eventually sell more than 4 million copies, becoming the best-selling symphonic album of all time. In addition, the box office sales for the movie Star Wars soon passed the previous highest-grossing film of that time, which was Jaws. Some critics complain that John Williams' scores aren't original enough, or that his soundtracks sound too much like classical compositions. However, John Williams has done many films, including Star Wars, that are meant to refer back to a specific time, place, and feeling, and the soundtrack would obviously need to reflect this. In fact, John Williams has been highly noted for his scores for British period films that reflect the influence of Ralph Vaughan Williams. All in all, John Williams has won 5 Academy Awards, 20 Grammy Awards, 3 Emmys, and if you count all of his scores for television episodes and full movies, He is credited with over 400 soundtracks. He has 52 Academy Award nominations, the most recent of which was the newest Star Wars movie, the 2019 The Rise of Skywalker, making him the most nominated person alive and placing him second only to Walt Disney himself. Truly, John Williams has preserved the orchestral film score for generations to come. While this is true, electronic music continued to develop, and many composers continued to experiment with electronic and synthesizer sounds in film music. The person who was perhaps the most influential in making the synthesizer an acceptable film instrument was Vangelis. Vangelis did not have any form of traditional music education, and he admitted that he never learned how to read or write music. He firmly believed that it was his job as a composer to bring to people what the pictures say and then extend it deeper. When he composed for a film, he would watch the movie and play on a keyboard whatever came to mind that seemed to fit the spirit and emotion of the film. Often, he would write most of the score in his first take. He did not like using computers as many composers at the time had begun to do. While he appreciated the development of technology, he believed that for music to be authentic, technology could only be useful after you have created. He is well known for playing all of his own keyboards and synthesizers, and his most famous film score, for which he earned an Academy Award, is the 1981 Chariots of Fire. This film, set in 1924, did not use the styles of 1920s music as most composers would have chosen to do. Instead, Vangelis used the modern Yamaha CS80 polyphonic synthesizer. Audiences of the time expected to hear modern electronic music in futuristic films such as Vangelis' later score for Blade Runner, but hearing it in a film about the past was extremely unexpected, and yet, somehow, it worked brilliantly. Computers and electronic music continued to improve, and soon there came a new film composer that considers his instrument to be the computer. Composer Hans Zimmer has several keyboards and guitars in his studio, but he prefers to create his soundtracks on his computer, having used tools such as a Euphonics System 5 mixing board and the Steinberg Cubase MIDI software. His musical education consists of 2 weeks of piano lessons, which he claims did not go very well. And yet, Hans Zimmer has gained extreme popularity because of his ability to blend electronic music with the traditional orchestral score. It is difficult to focus in on only one of Hans Zimmer's scores, for not only has he done many big-name movies that have gained him his recognition, he is still very active in his film career, which means that there has not been as much in-depth analysis of any singular score of his yet. Since the beginning of his film career in the 1980s, he has done nearly 150 films, including Crimson Tide, The Prince of Egypt, Pirates of the Caribbean, Interstellar, and the 1994 The Lion King, for which he won his Academy Award. When he composes, Hans Zimmer says he mentally prepares himself like an actor would in order to become the characters and be able to give voice to the emotional spirit of the film. For his scores for the Dark Knight trilogy, that meant creating music that would essentially be psychological torture to the listeners. But for his score for Gladiator, that meant introducing love and calmness, or as Zimmer puts it, poetry, to a film that seems to be about anger and revenge. It is apparent that Hans Zimmer believes that whatever the movie, whether it is a professional movie or a family video, it is music that truly creates the emotions. In some of the films he has done, such as The Da Vinci Code and Hidden Figures, the climax of the film is when the protagonist is thinking and gets an idea. It is the music that makes the act of watching someone think or calculate exciting. The score for the movie Inception had a rather interesting origin. For while Hans Zimmer knew the plot and had visited the set of the film to get an idea of the feeling of the film, the director Christopher Nolan asked Zimmer to work on the score on his own without seeing the movie. By creating the score in this way, the music was able to add to the ambiguity and complexity of the film in a way that no one could really have anticipated. Through it all, it is apparent that it's Hans Zimmer's ability to connect with the emotions of the characters that makes him so adept at film composing. As journalist Kelly Carter reviewed, multiple on-screen explosions are no match for the music of Hans Zimmer, who said, "Music is the emotional heart of a movie." These three composers, while very different from each other, have made an extremely important impact on film music as a whole. With the renewing of the orchestral soundtrack and the addition of electrical and synthesizer music, film music has become more popular than ever, and is highly unlikely that it will ever again become in danger of being considered old-fashioned and unnecessary.